Hello, good morning, and you're welcome to the Thrive 2020 Fireside Chat on energy and climate. My name is Ayo Shote. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of a small oil and gas firm out in Nigeria, but I'm currently in Aberdeen today. I've been in the oil and gas industry now since 1996, and I've done several things across the industry. So today with me, I have a gentleman who is a scientist by training, is a strategist by profession, and is a Christian by conviction. By conviction, yes. His name is Martyn Link. Martyn is a chief strategy officer for Wood Group. Wood Group is an organization that is global, has about 55,000 employees across 60 countries. And Martyn helps in championing net zero and helping oil and gas companies, especially Wood Group, diversify into new markets. Martyn, good morning.
Welcome, Ayo, and it's great to be with you today and be part of Thrive. So it's exciting to be taking on this topic today.
Excellent. Have you been on the past 6 days of Thrive, and what is your opinion about it?
Yeah, I've been behind the scenes watching everything that's been happening. It's been so encouraging. I thought we had a great day on Saturday, and Monday and Tuesday were really interesting as well, and last week. So it's been a wealth of just great teaching and some really great speakers. Hopefully we can keep it up today.
Excellent. Yeah, hopefully we can also live up to the expectations today, because today we have a very interesting topic: energy and climate change, which, when you look at the events of the past two and a half years, they've really been on the front burner. Especially with the lockdown, where you see the results that come out and talked about the fact that the air is clearer even from space, basically just puts this industry, especially the oil and gas industry, right at the front burner of climate change. Now, there are three things that we have today, Martyn. The first one is rekindling the creation mandate, basically reviving the blueprint. The second one is awakening our corporate conscience, which we believe is not on course right now. And the third one is conviction and courage. Basically, do we have the conviction and the courage to start to make changes, maybe not to impact our generation as much, but to impact the coming generation? Now, there are several scriptures in the Bible that makes an impact on me, but there's one that's very important that I think talks to the very first thing. If you look at the book of Genesis, chapter 1, you will see that the Bible says that God created man and then gave man a mandate, and he told man to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? Quite a lot of us, and subdue it also. So a lot of us, we focus on the subduing part, get everything out of the earth, and then just leave it the way it is. But if you go to chapter 2 of Genesis, you see, from what God said about the fact that there was nobody to till the land, so he did not allow rain to fall, rather he watered the surface with a mist. But the moment he created man, then he started to plant things, and he told man to tend the garden. So what are your perspectives as a Christian? How should we approach energy transition and climate change, considering the fact that the oil and gas industry have helped to drive civilization for over 100 years now? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Ayo. And you made a fantastic point about our creation mandate. As a Christian, we believe, I believe God made the world, and that when he made it, he made humans, and he gave us this mandate to be fruitful, as you mentioned, multiply, and subdue the earth. And I think one of the interesting aspects is, when you look back right into Genesis, you have like this world in abundance. The world had just been made. Human population was 2. The world was massive. So you've got this environment of abundance. And obviously that was, overuse of resources wasn't really an issue back then because there was just a very small number of people. Fast forward to the time when the Israelites went from the promised land. I think this is a really interesting time in the history of Israel, because actually going from this kind of creation mandate of, fill it, subdue it, take control, now you've got the land being apportioned and saying, actually, let's look how we do this fairly. We've got these resources in the land of Canaan. Let's actually divide it by tribe. Let's try and do it fairly. Let's try and give the land some rest so we don't overuse it. And you see this kind of shift from management of abundance to almost management of scarcity of resources. And I think, today for us in the energy industry, we're very, very familiar with managing scarce resources and oil. A few years ago, people talked about peak oil, being worried that there was enough out there. And now we talk about peak oil as if when can we see it declining in terms of demand. So the conversation shifted. And I think as Christians, what's our responsibility really to help steward the earth? And you use that word steward. And I think that's a really good word, because really, if we don't really care about the earth and we believe God made it, who is going to care about it? I think we should be the most passionate people about the creation and the earth's resources that there are out there.
Yeah, absolutely, Martyn. I'm in total agreement with you, and also I believe that no matter the industry we work in, we've got to be conscious of our responsibility as Christians. I mean, in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, the Lord Jesus said, "We are the light of the world, and we are the salt of the earth." A lot of times we tend to interpret that in spiritual terms, but what about what we do on a day-to-day basis? The decisions that we take at home, the decisions that we take in the office, how does that impact, the environment and the climate? One of the things I've seen, and it was reinforced when I was looking at an article on the internet a few days ago, is when you look at the climate change conversation, there's a tendency that we have created them against us conversation, where the world, everybody in the world thinks that Christians are not interested in climate change, and neither are we interested in ensuring that the world is repaired from an environmental perspective, which is very, very far from the truth, right? Christians actually had the original mandate of ensuring that the earth is cared for properly. Now, when I was looking at that article, it said that Christians typically engage the market in 4 different ways. We either survivors, where we see the marketplace as evil; we are sleepers, where we believe we can't change the marketplace; or we are influencers, where we believe that God cares about business and the Holy Spirit will help us to succeed. And then we're leaders, where we believe that by engaging the Holy Spirit at work, by engaging people and businesses and so on, we can actually transform our business environment, transform the marketplace, consequently transform the world. So for a Christian, what do you think is the relevance of climate change for a Christian?
That's a great question. And I really liked your 4 groups, Ayo. I think it's interesting, the last one, that leader. I mean, we were hearing on Saturday from Tony about God working in the top, the middle, and the bottom of society. And I think, not all of us get to shape the top of these spheres of influence. A lot of us are in the middle layers or even at the bottom, and we're just doing our recycling every day as citizens, whatever. But I think one of the interesting things, when you talk about responsibilities is, it's been an amazing kind of 10 years really at Wood. And, 10 years ago, I came from another industry. As you said, I'm a scientist by background, came from looking at pharmaceutical drugs and then thrown into oil and gas. And I think what I've learned over the last 10 years, I was asking God, why has this happened? What do you want me to do here? And I think one of the things that we see as Christians is sometimes we can bring our kind of ability to kind of see and hear things that are further ahead, that we maybe in some circles call prophetic, or in other areas call, they used to call them the seers, didn't they? The people who could see what was coming. And I guess what's, as a Christian in this environment where, you're almost trying to avoid the extremes of, on the one hand, of the world's going to crash tomorrow, let's, stop everything, let's glue ourselves to trains, let's have this extreme reaction to wake everybody up and say the house is on fire. And then the other reaction, which is actually, well, things are not too bad and we'll make little adjustments and we'll just kind of course correct over the next 100 years. And I think as Christians, we can blend this kind of 2 worlds, 2 extremes, to walk a middle path, to say, actually, if you take that kind of voice of change and be a change agent in your society, in your culture, in your company, you can actually make a lot of impact over a relatively short space of time if you're that kind of voice of, we need to see that there are changes possible. And if we work together, we can accomplish a lot. I mean, one of the 6 M's in LICC is that kind of molding and shaping of culture.
Mhm.
And I think as Christians, this is a key area for us, climate change and energy, where in Scotland, we've got a net zero target by 2045. We've got the COP conference next year in 2021. So this is really the world's eyes are on Scotland in the next year or so. And I think we have an opportunity to influence it at the top, the middle, and the bottom.
Okay, thanks, Martyn. So if I go back to the four categories I talked about earlier, right? I personally think that quite a lot of us as Christians, we're survivors in the market, right? We see the market as evil. We see a great drive towards profitability, and don't get me wrong, there's a drive towards profitability, but I also think that we can remain profitable while we remain conscious of the climate or even the people around us. So, and then when you then take all that and then you put that in the context of the global pandemic that we're going through, the fact that the entire world practically shut down for close to 5 months, right? Now, for the environment, it's fantastic. The air was cleaned up. We saw results all over the place. But for people also, it was not exactly fantastic. People lost their jobs, right?
Yeah.
Quite a lot of people could not feed themselves. There was a very sad story about a lady that starved to death. I think it was in Glasgow. So you see both sides. So I'm coming back to the question of culture, like you mentioned, right? What I've seen, and I might be biased because I'm in the oil and gas industry, but what I've seen is the fact that from a cultural perspective, we want to shut everything down. We want to stop the exploitation of oil and gas. We don't want anything to do with nuclear, right? But renewable energy is not as efficient as we hope it will be and as we want it to be. Now, the question is this: how do we view the Earth's resources at this time? And how do we bring that into the construct of corporate conscience?
Yeah.
We've still got to keep exploiting oil and gas until renewable energy becomes efficient. But how do we balance that? From a cultural perspective, I think it's a difficult conversation. So how do we do that? What are your thoughts?
That's a fantastic question, Ayo. And I think one of the shifts that we've seen, which is really encouraging, I think, is that a lot of the climate change debate has shifted from, if you like, the barricades to the boardroom. Now we're seeing the big companies in the world dealing with these issues really seriously. And I think, one of the encouraging things that I've seen in the world that, I work in every day is called ESG. It's environmental, societal governance as a kind of running a good business. ESG looks at how do we become sustainable and profitable. So, the 3 Ps, people, planet, profit. Well, this is all about, for a long time, we've kind of emphasized profit. But now, we need to consider the planet and people as just as important, and all three are actually in balance. And I heard this really interesting observation. I was on a conference with the World Economic Forum about 2 months ago. And somebody said to me, or said to all of us actually, in 2008-9, we had the financial crisis. And looking back, that was almost the G in ESG. It was a governance crisis that we had back then. And now we have a global pandemic, which is impacting society, and it's like the S in ESG. We're now having a huge crash and crisis in society. And what the person said then was, let's not have an E crisis time as well, when the environment, as it's starting to do now, really kicks up a lot of really tough physical climate change. And I think, this is really starting to take hold. We're seeing a lot of big companies changing direction, changing strategy. There's a number of metrics that are coming out now where companies are having to report their climate risk, their financial risk, their climate risk. And certainly what I'm seeing is that we're starting to see these companies shifting. There's some companies out there like Microsoft that have said, we don't just want to go net zero, we want to claw back all the carbon we've ever released in our lifetime. And this is like, wow, how are we going to do that? We don't know how we're going to do it. It's that level of ambition is phenomenal. Now, that's not everywhere, right? Not every company is like that. But I think one of the things I've realized is God's put me in this position of influence. He's put me in this kind of strategy role, looking at the future, trying to make sense of all this stuff that's happening out there. I can influence the people, the top 200 leaders in Wood. with what I think is going to happen in the future, and I can speak at conferences and influence people in my peers and maybe in parts of government, and really try and say how do we try and shift everyone towards this kind of new direction in a way that's protecting the environment, but also creating wealth and protecting jobs. It's encouraging to see these changes, but there's a lot more to do yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. There's a lot more to do. Actually, there was a question that just came up from the audience. I think it fits in a little bit with one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I mean, talking about the corporate conscience, right? I was about to ask you, by the time we move further down with some of the initiatives that you've talked about, right? There's obviously going to be an impact on the oil and gas industry in Scotland, right?
Yeah.
So it comes back to that push and pull that I talked about earlier, because the question basically says, why is Scotland not leading on all things green? Now we know the bulk of the wealth in Scotland is from oil and gas, right? And if we don't have a viable alternative, we could become first in all things green, but overall wealth for the nation, for the people, basically will drop off. So how do you balance that? So are you willing to answer that question?
Yeah,
then maybe paint a picture of what's the impact of all this on the future of oil and gas in Scotland?
Yeah, I'll give it a go, Ayo. I think so. There's some positives that we can look at first. I mean, if you look at the net zero target, the UK was one of the first countries to put that into legislation last year. Very exciting. 2050 net zero target, and Scotland actually has gone 5 years earlier than the UK to 2045. So I think that's a huge statement of our intent as a country to be one of the leaders around the world in terms of achieving this kind of net zero target. On the other side, you also have the abundant resources of Scotland. When you think about renewable energy, maybe not so much solar, but certainly wind, onshore and offshore wind, and some solar, tidal also for the future. So I think Scotland's very blessed to have a lot of natural resources. That its geography, its natural dynamics is very strong for renewables and for all things green. I think where you touched on it yourself, I think where there's the transition, and this is why it's not called an energy leap, it's called an energy transition.
Yeah.
Because you've got, I think there's something like 400,000 people employed either directly or indirectly in the oil and gas supply chain in total in the UK.
Okay.
So when you're looking at all those people and all that kind of activity, you can't just switch the tap off and then switch another tap on and jump across. You have to look at somehow there's where we are today, and then there's where we want to be in 20 years time, 25 years time or whatever. And then there's the gap in between. And this is a big part of, I guess, my job for this company, one company, but also for the country. How do we create the jobs in the future that are going to help us create the industries in the future and the jobs and the wealth in some of these new areas? That's not straightforward. So a lot of the discussions at the moment are things like around hydrogen and carbon capture and electric vehicles and all these great ideas. And this takes policy from the government. It takes companies willing to invest money. It takes people with skills to do the work. So all of this is like a big ball that gets rolling and rolling. And I think some of the encouraging things that happened recently, the EU released a new deal for hydrogen. The UK has also done something similar. So I think we look at policy first from government and see where they're putting their kind of intent to grow the economy. And then you look at the indigenous skill set, a lot of good skills in oil and gas that could transfer across. Engineering is going to be needed. And, so there are some really positive signs. And I think we're leading in some areas. I think our ambition is really strong. And then I think it's down to a lot of Scottish companies to say, how do I individually transition my company over the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay. Excellent, Martyn. I really appreciate that. So let me take this a little bit sideways into Africa, right? When you look at where Africa is today compared to the other parts of the world, Africa, I believe, still needs more of the, should I say, dirty energy to accelerate its development. Now, maybe Africa needs to, invest a lot more in solar because you have the abundance of sun in Africa. And so how do you think we can take some of the things that is being done in Europe today, right? And Christians in Africa will then take the forefront in trying to drive that change. Because don't get me wrong, although I work in the dirty side of the industry, practically oil and gas, the service side, and some of the EMP side also, I still believe that we need to focus on climate change. We've got to be a lot more efficient in the way we exploit oil and gas, and it's got to be cleaner. But how do you think Africa can take this? And Christians from Africa, or Christians going back to Africa as missionaries, can then drive this? Because I don't think we have only spiritual missionaries. I think we have economic missionaries also. Christians that are there to work, but can drive the mandate of the Lord whilst there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one of the interesting things about when we look at the future of the world and how we might achieve, some of the targets, I'm sure people listening are familiar with the IPCC report and how we're, the Paris Agreement and all these things about 1.5 degrees, trying to be less than 2 degree temperature rise. When you look at these as a planetary, system, you've got some real challenges. You've got countries that are very high emitters, like China and the US. Some of these countries are involved. We had 150 or so countries signing the Paris Agreement, and the US have started the withdrawal process. So you've got big emitters who may or may not be involved in the future. And then you have the developing economies as well, with parts of Asia, Africa you mentioned, where a lot of these countries are saying, okay, it's okay for you, UK or Europe, you've had your 100 years of growth and polluting the planet whilst we we're kind of watching. Now it's our turn to grow. We want economic wealth. We want to grow our economy. We want to create jobs. And you're telling us we have to do it in a very friendly and clean way. And I think that kind of challenge presents opportunity.
Yeah.
I think there is opportunity for leapfrog. We've seen that in telecoms. We see it in some digital areas where we can take advanced technology to Africa and kind of leapfrog the journey that industrialization has been on over the last couple of hundred years.
Yeah.
But I think, part of the challenge is social as well as technological. And this actually brings up a kind of a little story. Is it okay if I share something from last year that I did?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it actually brings up, we actually looked at all the different scenarios and uncertainties about this, and Africa was one of those, and Asia and Europe. And we did a piece of scenario planning last year. It was the first ever one that we'd done in Wood. It was May 2019. And we came up with a report which had 4 different scenarios. And essentially what we tried to do was say, what could happen in the future over the next 15 years. So it was quite a difficult task. And what we realized was there's 2 big drivers of change. The first one is around the degree of global alignment. Will countries pull together? Will they work together or will they pull apart? And we've seen with COVID how sometimes on some things countries will help each other, and then at other times they'll compete with each other. And I think that's a big question for next year and for COP is, will countries actually, will there be this level of kind of consolidation and camaraderie across nations to work on this together? The other massive uncertainty was technology. Will we see technology rapidly deployed and costs coming down as we'd like to see, or not? And so when you kind of plot those kind of high, low, kind of 4 different scenarios, you come up with a world where basically only in one of those 4 did we actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the way that we would like to do according to the Paris Agreement. And then you'll know about offshore Europe. Well, if you're in oil and gas, there's 2 big conferences, offshore Europe, and then what's called OTC in Houston, offshore Europe in Aberdeen.
Yeah.
And they're every year. They kind of leapfrog each other every 2 years. So offshore Europe last year, I actually talked about these scenarios, and I did a story based on this good scenario, and I based it actually in Nigeria, in Lagos, around this girl called Sophie. And what you realize with oil and gas folks is that a lot of them talk about their children, whether they want to go into oil and gas. And a lot of folks are saying their kids don't want to go into it, which is sad. And I thought, well, why don't we tell a story around this hypothetical child who in 2019 was 2 years old, so he'll be 3 years old in 2020. This is nearly exactly a year ago that I shared this. And then we fast forward and we go through her life over the next 15 years. So she's 18 in 2035. What would that look like? How could we get there? To your question, how could we do it? And so I kind of told this story through the eyes of Sophie. And what I wanted to do was just capture people's imagination of what was possible.
Yeah.
You know, how could we get there in a quite a tough area of Nigeria, and kind of how could we grow it? And so I told these like little 2-minute vignettes at this kind of energy transition hub last year. And I think, you know, who knows if they're going to come true, right? So
Yeah.
the things have changed massively in a year with COVID and all these kind of things. But I think storytelling is a really, really key aspect of what we're going to do. I think we need to believe change is possible, and we need to tell the stories of what's possible, and then work together to try and achieve it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Martyn. Yes, storytelling is actually extremely important. Before I go to the next question from the audience, I wanted to throw a very controversial question at you. When you look at some of the discourse we have in Christian circles, right? There's a subset that believes, you know what, climate change is part of the normal prophetic conversation about the end time. So why bother? So what are your thoughts? Do you think that's true? And if it is, since we don't know the time of the end, do we just fold our hands, or do we do what is right based on the scriptures and take care of the earth that God has given us? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think I guess this gets to the heart of the message of the gospel and the mandate of the gospel. I mean, and each of us will have slightly different emphasis on how we understand what the Bible says. I mean, when you look back through all the different conversations that God has with his people, and you go back to Adam and then Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and you kind of plot the conversations that God has, and then we get to, you know, Jesus and the disciples. When you look at that holistically and that kind of, you know, redemption theme right throughout the Bible, I would say that, you know, if you look at that holistically and try and understand, you know, what does this mean for me and us in the world that we're in right now? Should I, and it's partly discussed in Tim Keller's Center Church, actually. I would really recommend that as a great book that deals with some of these questions. Part of it is, you know, is it possible to change culture? Is culture inherently good, or is it inherently bad? Is it actually impossible to change it, or can we change it? Or should I change it? And should I not just stand back and let the end come and everything go into chaos? And I guess the way I would answer that is to say that I believe that God has given us gifts and abilities. If you look at Joseph, when he went to Egypt, I think God puts people in strategic points to help turn the course of a nation. And I think that is something that God has done numerous times in the Bible. And I think, you know, I would say I don't sit around worrying about, you know, the end times and when that's going to be. I think, you know, there's a kind of a work that we're given to do as Christians in the harvest field, in the mission field, in the sectors that we're in. And you know, I think when I look at the future, you know, I guess the comfort that we have is, you know, I actually brought along a book that I was going to refer to. I don't know if anybody's read this. I don't know if you can look backwards on my screen, but it actually says this is The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. And I read this last year. And basically what he does in that book is he projects forward what a 3.5 or a 4 degree world will look like by the end of the century. So if our temperature rises, if we go on the trajectory we're on right now, we're probably looking at a 3.5 degree temperature rise by the end of the century. And he basically looks at what the world would look like in a 3 or 4 degree temperature rise world. And he goes through drought, he goes through water, he goes through refugees. And the picture he paints is unbelievably stark. And I actually gave that to a couple of my friends and said, read that, you know, that'll make you think. And I think when I read that, part of some people's response is despair, right? This is coming, it's going to be horrendous. Nobody's listening to the science. They kind of throw their hands up and jump to an extreme reaction. I think for the Christian, I look at it and I think, well, actually, that future's not happened yet. And I believe God cares about his world. He cares about people. I think he wants to have a world where there's greater equality, greater sharing of wealth, greater sustainability of our resources. I believe he wants that, and so I guess that's what I'm working towards, every day.
Okay, excellent. So there are two questions now. I think the audience is really
getting warmed up.
Yeah, they're getting warmed up right now. So the first question is: do you think separation from the EU will impact plans and progress towards a sustainable world, basically?
Interesting. I wouldn't say it would have a massive impact. I think it's not something that we can control now. It's kind of happening. So 2 or 3 years ago, we might have been debating what might happen, what might not. But now I think we've got to kind of live with the results of the vote and what the political system that we have. So the work that I'm doing in a big private company, I would say it's hampered by any political boundaries. So, we work, as you said, in 60 odd countries around the world with a lot of different governments. Will it hamper the country? I don't think it will. I wouldn't be too discouraged about our opportunities as an exporter or as a collaborator politically or economically by that.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with you, and I think that's where the discourse about awakening the corporate conscience actually comes in. Over the years, we've spent too much time waiting on the government to do something, and I see that quite a lot in Africa, where I've spent most of my adult years. And it's very frustrating because government, personally, I think government by nature are not as fast to respond to something. From a corporate perspective, the second most powerful organization that can drive a change are corporate organizations, right? And I think if we can awaken our corporate conscience, we can then take on the gauntlet and try to drive this change. I think we can see that change being driven across the board. And it doesn't matter where we are. I could be in Nigeria, have an organization where I decide from day one, even if I'm working in oil and gas, I want to be environmentally responsible.
Yeah.
I have processes, procedures in place to ensure that is done. Now, it could be slightly more expensive initially, but right at the end of the day, just like you said, it's profits, people, on the planet. We could actually agree, together in the box and be able to achieve the three, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's a very interesting question that's just coming up. Now, yesterday, there was an exchange between the President of the United States and the National Resource Secretary about the California wildfires and the impact on climate change. Now, the President said it will start getting cooler. You just watch. Now, the Natural Resource Secretary said, I wish science agreed with you, right? And Portus answered and said, actually, I don't think science knows anything. Now, as a scientist and as a Christian, how do we respond and engage to hold our leaders accountable for that detrimental impact of their choices on the earth? Now, are their choices alone? I don't think so, but I mean, let's look at it within that context, and so that they can start to listen to science. Now, you will agree that there's a friction between science and religion. Now, we don't practice religion. Christianity is a lifestyle for us, but there's this constant push and pull between science and religion. So how do we hold our leaders accountable to ensure that they make the right choices?
That is a fantastic question, and I think one thing I've learned, when I go back in my career, so I started, I did 8 years in academia and looking at diabetes and biology and physiology, and then I did 8 years in the life science industry looking at different pharmaceutical drugs, and then now 10 years in oil and gas. And I guess I started very kind of focused on analysis and data, and for many, many years I thought, well, the way to convince people to do the right thing is to give them the right data. And I would put up all these charts and graphs, and I would say, well, this is what's going to happen. Here's what the data says, and then I would expect people to say, oh, thanks for telling us that. We're going to shift our strategy now in a different direction. But what you actually realize is that people don't often make decisions purely based on data. A lot of the time, the decisions we made, I think we were hearing about this with Tarek on Friday, actually, are emotional decisions.
Yeah.
And that's why, I'll give you a great example of this. And it touches on what you were saying about, how do we change corporations, because when you look at the top corporations, a lot of their kind of market cap and wealth is bigger than a lot of countries.
Yeah.
So the influence of the biggest companies is huge now. And so I had an opportunity last year off the back of the scenario work to speak to the top 200 leaders in wood, and I had 8 minutes. Right, so I had 8 minutes to make an impact and share some of thoughts. And I basically stood up and I showed them this diagram. And I don't know if you remember this. This is the picture from a year ago on the front cover of The Economist last September. And it basically shows the temperature across the last 150 years. And each temperature is a different color based on whether it's cool, is blue, dark blue, and then hotter and hotter is redder and redder. So you can see here we are, coming this way. So I lifted this up and I said to them, 18 of the hottest ever, in the top 20 hottest years, 18 have been in the last 20 years. And actually the last 5 years have been the hottest ever. And then I told them, when you look at carbon dioxide release, half of all the carbon we've ever released into the atmosphere was released in the last 30 years. And then I said to them, the average age in this room is probably somewhere between 52 and 53. And you got to remember, this is the exec team. This is 200 leaders. So I said, the average age is about 50 years old. That means this has happened on our watch. When we've been out there working in industry, we've released this carbon in the last 30 years. And then I said, the average age expectancy in the UK is about 82 years old. That means we have another 30 years from now to put it right. And I said, what we do in the next 5 years will determine what happens in the next 100 years. And I kind of laid it out to them, and I said, look, this is our children and our children's children. That's going to impact folks. And maybe 5 years ago, I might have showed them a load of data and charts, but I went up there with a book and a magazine, and I just said, look, this is what's happening. This is about our children and our children's children and our planet that we're going to leave for forever. Yeah. At some point, we're going to leave it behind. What legacy are we going to leave for the next generation?
Yeah. Absolutely, and you're right. We can throw out all the data that we want, right? We've got to connect with our leaders on an emotional level, using part of the data to paint the right picture that they connect with on an emotional level, and then we can get that change. And that goes right into the next question that I have from the audience, which basically says, are the major oil companies in Aberdeen collaborating on this issue? Now, because of your role in wood, I'm sure you have some insight into this.
Yeah, another great question. So there's actually a huge amount of collaboration going on right now. And we were talking about this just yesterday, actually, because if you work in industry, you'll probably be aware of there's like pre-competitive space and then there's competitive space. And in science, it's interesting being in science and then going to oil and gas and energy. You realize actually in science, there's a much, much bigger space of pre-competitive discussion that you can have. So you can look at a receptor on a cell and you can give it a fancy name and you can talk about it for hours at conferences, because actually nobody knows what drugs are going to come from developing knowledge about that receptor. Whereas in oil and gas, it's much, much quicker that you get into a competitive conversation. And so what I've seen, been in this company and this industry for 10 years, is that when I first joined, I would say a lot of the companies were in different silos, different spheres, and actually they were just doing their own thing to try and make money. Now, when we look at the challenges that have come out, there's this organization called the United Nations Global Compact, and this is basically working with about, 3,000 or 4,000 companies right across the world to try and pull them together to help achieve some of the sustainable development targets, the 17 SDGs that the world has said, to be sustainable, we need to have, clean water, sustainable cities, renewable energy. And so this whole movement of companies is happening right now. And so I was privileged to be in New York last June and have an hour and a half with the UN Global Compact. And I said to them at the end of the meeting, that's the best meeting I've had that year. Wow. It blew me away to hear what's happening right across the world, across all these different private sector companies, to try and achieve the targets that we're setting ourselves as a world is unbelievable. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen, right? Just because a lot of talk and a lot of conversation. But I think it is encouraging to see the degree of collaboration. And maybe some of it's in Aberdeen, but actually a lot of it's in London. A lot of it's it's all on Teams now and Zoom. But I kind of talk to a lot of different organizations, particularly I think government agencies that have been set up to work in this area, and also the supply chain and our clients. So I would say, a lot of my time and effort is spent, how do we get 5,000 companies working together to achieve these targets? It's a huge ask.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very huge ask. Now, but that then moves me into the next question. You talked about, what companies are saying, but whatever they say does not mean that it's going to get done. So let's go into the conviction and the courage side of this conversation, right? In one of your answers, you talked about Joseph, and Joseph for me is one of my favorite characters from the scriptures.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I think with the dream that Pharaoh had, Egypt also was facing something similar to what we're facing today. I mean, a 7-year famine that was going to impact not only Egypt, but the entire surrounding nations, right?
Yeah.
It's that amount to climate change.
Climate catastrophe.
Yes. And then Joseph was in a place where it was not, I don't think he was really allowed to practice his faith, right? But he had an opportunity to understand what was coming. And he had also a solution, and it was placed right in the forefront, right? Although the Bible does not talk about it, but I also believe they faced an environment where people would have resisted. One is an Hebrew boy. Two, it doesn't have any sort of experience at all except running a big household, right? So as Christians, where we see some of these things, we're not at that level of functional authority to make those changes, but we are told by the Lord Jesus that anywhere we go, we have to be the light, because you cannot light a candle and put it under the table. You've got to put it on top of the table. What role can a Christian play in the climate agenda? And how do we turn our passion into action?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. I mean, a lot of it depends, on your own sphere of influence. That's the topic for today, is the sphere of influence that we're in, and energy and climate change. And I think, we're not all able to influence. You've got a great influence over your company. You can help in that respect. I've got a degree of influence, mostly through conversations and trying to convince people rather than direct power. I guess you could say it's kind of soft power. But I think, part of it for me, what I've learned over the last year is this is not something that we kind of go from one day not having it all figured out to the next day having it all figured out, and all of a sudden we've got all the answers for everyone, right? That's not how it works. I think a much better way and a much healthier way to look at it is, how can I raise the ambition of myself and those around me today? How do I raise the ambition of what's possible? If I look back over the last 18 months, I've been doing 2 jobs kind of effectively. My day job, which is the strategy role, and then since April last year, I've been doing the energy transition. And this role has really been to try and raise the ambition, or raise the knowledge and raise the ambition for the energy transition in wood. And I think, how do we do that as Christians? I think, we act with integrity, all the kind of the normal stuff that we take for granted. But occasionally, I think on these things, we need to be willing to raise our voice and speak up. I think, we need to understand what platforms do we either have access to, or can we build together to influence those around us and engage. I mean, it's very similar to what we were hearing on Monday in the government conversation. Perhaps we can sit at home and be frustrated that not more has been done on climate change. But, part of it is, that we're a citizen as well as an employer or employee or a Christian. We're a citizen of Scotland or UK. We have a responsibility to make it a better place. So I would say, I think about how you can raise the ambition of others around you. Share your passion, find your voice as an individual, but then work together to develop your platform and how you can influence others.
Okay, what about your personal footprint also? Do you take action on that and then let it be known? Also, churches, for example, I mean, the gathered church, we we've got to. I think the church also has got to start taking some steps. How many churches in Aberdeen today have gone to renewable energy? Right, small wind,
Yeah.
wind. I don't know what it's called. Yeah, wind turbines, solar panels. Right, we've got to take some of those steps. It might seem small initially,
Yeah.
but when people start to see that churches and groups of Christians are taking some of those small steps, they could then start asking the questions, why are you doing this? I mean, is
Yeah.
it not too expensive for you? And then we can then start having those conversations based on the scriptures, of course, but to help drive that conversation.
Yeah.
We know today that energy translates to wealth.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but the question is, how do we then start to transit from the dirty type of energy to the clean type
Yeah.
without impacting the wealth value chain as so much, right?
Yeah.
That's critical, and that's very important. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question. I mean, I was listening to you. You spent some time as a scientist in the drug industry, and then you've now spent 10 years in oil and gas. So tell me, I mean, maybe for my own education, how did that happen, and what are the things that you've learned from that?
Yeah.
Because we have about 30 minutes to go, so I think
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's. I think just one comment before I answer that question.
Yeah.
At another meeting I was at, I was meeting a big organization, a big NGO that manages a lot of investment money, and the guy was. We were talking about this issue, and what I realized coming out of that meeting was lifting people out of poverty and lifting them onto electrification is actually really, really closely connected. They're really related.
Yeah.
So if we can lift people onto the electrification that we're enjoying right now, then we will also help lift people out of poverty. And I think that's a really important thing to remember is, as well as creating wealth, we're lifting hundreds of thousands and God willing, millions of people out of poverty. And one of the facts that really stuck with me when I was getting used to energy and studying it was the scenarios that there's a well-respected group called the International Energy Agency, the IEA, and they forecasted in 2035. This was like 2 or 3 years ago now. 900 million people would still be without electricity in 2035. Wow. 900 million people in 2035. And to me, when I read that, I was like, wow, that is such an unbelievably big number. Nearly 1 billion people without any electricity.
Yeah.
How do we change that? And so to answer your question, I think we probably don't have enough time for the full story, but effectively I was doing a similar role to what they were looking for was it Wood Group back in the day. And it was a good time in my career to make a change. They were willing to take a risk. I was willing to take a risk. And we ended up making beautiful music together. And, I think in the end, what I've learned is actually it's been a massive advantage to come into an industry with a complete blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Because you don't have any kind of blinkers or prejudice. You look at things on fact as much as possible. You're very objective.
Yeah. But
it does take time. I mean, it took me a couple of years really to try and figure out some of the fundamentals of oil and gas. And then since 2015, 16, we've been diversifying. So now we're across a dozen different sectors. So I'll probably spend as much time looking at transportation and water as I will as oil. So now we're very, very broad. So I think, it's a fascinating journey.
Oh, excellent. So I think still we have about 36 participants on. I was expecting more, and it seems the questions have dried up. I really would like one or two questions that will put us on our toes and make sure that we can answer some of your concerns.
There's maybe just one other thing I could just in reference to your other question, actually, just about how do we? You were talking about how we can make an influence. Do we kind of tell people when we're doing things? I'm not such a massive fan of kind of what they call virtue signaling, but I think one of the really strong things that I've tried to do is make a difference in my own personal life, but then not kind of speak about it directly, but almost indirectly. When I was developing the concept for Wood of the energy transition, I developed this phrase that I've been saying for the last year, and that is, you cannot earn your way out of a problem you've lived your way into. And
Wow.
I used that quite a lot last year. You know, we say, how can we make money out of this change? We've lived our life as consumers. We've gone on Amazon every 5 minutes, got another delivery, another package. We've driven all over the world. We've flown all over the world. But hey, now we're going in a different direction. How can we make money with this new direction? And what we need to realize is that we have to change the way you live.
Yeah.
You can't keep living the way you're living and earn money and expect a different outcome.
Absolutely.
And I think, you know, we're going to see, God willing, greenhouse gas go down by 8% this year. That is just a tip of the iceberg of the change that's needed. So we need to look at huge structural change over the next 10 to 15 years to make a big impact on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think, you know, one of the questions, I'll maybe just finish after this a little bit, but I've got four different conferences I'm speaking at in the next 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And I've kind of shifted the conversation, and I'm going to start talking about time, trust, and targets. Because I think, you know, when we look at, we started the conversation right at the beginning about scarcity of resources. And I think what I've started to realize is the most scarce resource of all is not oil, it's not gas, it's not gold or lithium or cobalt, it's actually time.
Yeah.
Because time is going fast and it doesn't come back.
Yeah.
And next to time, the most scarce resource is actually trust, because countries are not going to work together if they don't trust each other.
Absolutely.
And so you look at these two, you know, the time that we have, you know, when you look at the world's, people talk about the carbon budget of the world, you know, how much carbon can we still release? And it's almost like we're going through this timeline, and at some point we'll have released so much carbon that we can't ever go back under it's inevitable that will increase temperature by 1.5 degrees. And that date, according to some research, is 2029. We have 9 years left of our carbon budget before we are definitely irreversibly in a 1.5 degree scenario. Then if you take that to 2050, that becomes then a 2 degree scenario world. And then you've got another 50 years of incremental growth of carbon greenhouse gases, and you'll be reaching about a 4 degree world by the end of the century. So, you know, this is the scale of the challenge. And I think, you know, how do we deal with that as Christians? That's what we've been talking about. But maybe we'll take another question now.
Yes, suddenly the floodgates have opened again, right? But from what you just said, right, it just means that even the 2045 and the 2050 dates by government it's too far. We've got to do some things
now
that are really drastic today, right, to ensure that we don't get to that point. So there are 3 questions out here now. Question number 5, maybe I might leave to the very last, but I'm going to read it out to you so that you can hold on to it. What is the most significant thing you've done in life today? That's for you, Martyn.
Wow. Okay.
And what have you yet to do? But I'm going to leave that maybe as the concluding question that you're going to use to close out this session. Question number 6 says, is there a Christian organization that has a voice in this area? We have MAF, we have LICC, but do we have a climate voice? That
is a fantastic question. I would love there to be an organization. I don't think there is. Maybe we're going to create it, but I've not come across one. I would love there to be something in this space.
Yeah, I agree with you also, and that would take that would put we Christians right in the center of the climate change conversation, which we need to be part of and we need to help drive. So question number 7 is, I'm wondering from an educational point of view, is there a measurable way we ought to be ascribing greater emphasis on change strategy across FEHE to have a number of dedicated courses to enable and educate future influencers?
That's another fantastic question. So that's higher education, further education. So it's about 4 months ago. No, actually, it must have been 6 months ago. I sat in on a new MBA that's been launched by Robert Gordon University, the Energy Transition MBA, and I was the external validator, I guess, to kind of look at it and did it make sense? Was it the right kind of content? So things like that, universities are starting to look at how do we take this group of people who are very skilled and knowledgeable and help them jump to the new industries. So, you know, things like an energy transition MBA, I would really recommend for people interested in that. I do believe there's new there will be new courses in the future being developed at universities and colleges around the new economies that we're going to need, but probably a bit early for that. I think it's mostly higher education. Well, so it's kind of like postgraduate degrees at the moment, masters, MBAs that I see coming out right now.
Okay. I also think that maybe we need to consider something within the elementary school or middle school or high school so that the young ones can. I know they're having some form of conversation, but I think they need to have more. Now we have just 4 minutes to go. So we're going to go back to our concluding question. So what is the significant thing you've done in life today? And what have you yet to do? And that question is asked by John.
Yeah. So I think marrying my wife was the most significant thing I've done today. And yeah, I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's about, you know, family and relationships and loved ones. You know, that's the most important thing in life. And, you know, we might have this career and, you know what, we might make a massive difference. We might not, we might fail and not achieve all our goals and dreams. But at the end of the day, we're going to retire from these jobs one day. We're going to be sat at home, you know, feet up, hopefully by the fire, you know, and hopefully there'll be a loving spouse beside us that we'll be able to share that time with. And I think, you know, for me, that's the most significant thing I've ever done. I think looking forward into the future, who knows? I mean, I guess I have a passion for, you know, I guess, you know, for me personally, I have a real yearning to see an impact in this and kind of hopefully, God willing, have the church awaken to some of these opportunities. I guess just, you know, the way that I would think about it is I was on this call in June, the United Nations Global Compact. It was the 20-year anniversary. And somebody shared, I'll say 2 things about this and then I'll finish. So they shared at the end that the biggest priorities for the world, this is like their kind of big global summit, were health, inequality, and climate change. Those were the 3 biggest. And I guess my first passion is I would love for us as Christians to have our top 3 match, or the top 3 of the world be in our top 5, let's say. You know, how can we be as concerned for health, inequality, and climate change as we are for other things? Because I think God is a holistic God, considered, you know, he's interested in mind, body, and soul. And you know, I don't think these things are high enough up the organized, I guess, gathered church's agenda. And the other thing I'll leave you with this saying, it's this lady from I think it was New Zealand, a Maori lady by descent. She shared with me this, or with all of us, this comment. She said, "When the land is in pain, warriors are born." And I thought, I think the land's in pain, folks. We need warriors who are going to go and make a difference for Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Martyn. Thank you for that last words. Yes, we do need warriors who will go out there and make an impact for Jesus in every sphere of life, because that's what we're created to do. We're created to be the light. I think I'm going to leave us with this scripture that says that the creation is groaning and waiting earnestly for the manifestation of the sons of God. And basically that's what you just said. We, even in the climate change space, without reducing the amount of energy we produce, we've got to get out there and manifest as sons of God so that the creation can feel our impact and then also start to see the world repaired. So thank you very much, Martyn. It's been an excellent 1 hour. I've learned quite a lot. Hopefully I'm going to make that move out of oil and gas into something else. But I don't intend to retire, because I love walking and I love mentoring young people. So that's going to continue. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending 1 hour of your time with us. We do appreciate it. And let's join me in thanking Martyn for bringing his wealth of experience in this subject to us. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day.
Thank you.
Thank you.